Okay, good afternoon and welcome to Global Communication 2. This is the makeup lecture for Friday, November the 18th for sections 7 and 8. As you know, classes were canceled for today, so I'm going to be doing a makeup lecture for you, and I hope you enjoy it. Today, I'll be talking about how to write a summary, and I'll be using the article that you read for homework, From Student to Employee, A Difficult Transition. And then in the second part of the lecture, I would like to give you some advice on how to prepare for a job interview. I think it's some good information about how to prepare before a job interview and what you should do and what you shouldn't do in a job interview. I've had a fair amount of experience over the last 25 years in job interviews, so I hope you'll find some of my advice useful. Okay, so I don't want to keep you here for too long, so let me quickly, I'll get started on the first part of my lecture right away. So I hope you enjoy it. Here we go. Here we go. All right, so I want to start off with today's first topic, which is how to write an effective summary. Just a quick heads up. On the final exam, I will be giving a summary assignment or a summary question. I will tell you to read an article in the textbook and then to summarize it in a few paragraphs. And I hope today I can give you some advice on how to actually write a good summary. I'm also going to give you a little bit of homework today, which will tell you about how you can write a good summary too. So you will leave today's class with all the information that you need. Okay, so let's take a look at that article for a second. From Student to Employee, a Difficult Transition. This is on pages 155 and 156. This is a 2-page article. So imagine if I asked you to summarize this article, okay, take this article and take it, the main idea, its supporting ideas, maybe a few examples, and compress it. Usually when you write a summary, it's a good idea to try and compress it to about 20 or 25% of the original size or the original number of words. So if you have an article that is about, 1,000 words, you're probably looking at a summary of between 200 and 250 words. What I did was I read the article From Student to Employee, and I made my own summary for it. And I think my summary is actually a little bit too long. I think I might have included a little bit too much information. But if you compare the original article to my summary, I think you will get a very good idea as to how you can summarize a larger piece of text in a much shorter version. Okay, so here's what I'm talking about. So the first 2 paragraphs of the article, the introduction, I really just want to mention the name of the article, its title. I want to say who the author is. I want to describe the situation which the article focuses on, as well as the main idea of the article. If you read the original article, there's a very long introduction where they give the example of a student at San Jose University walking to class on a cold January morning. Trust me, none of that belongs in a summary. The first paragraph in the original article has a lot of information that is just to get you interested in the topic. It's not actually something you need to put in the summary. In the summary, in the first part of the summary, you just want to tell me the title of the article, the author, what is the situation that the article describes, and what's the main idea or the purpose of the writer writing this article. So here's how I summarized the introduction. This is paragraphs 1 and 2. In the article, From Student to Employee, A Difficult Transition, Mina Alonso looks at some problems that many recent graduates face in the workforce and offers some solutions. Okay, so we've got the title of the article, From Student to Employee, A Difficult Transition. I've mentioned the author of the article, Mina Alonso, and then I have the purpose of the article. Why did she write this? She looks at some of the problems that many recent graduates face in the workforce, and she offers some solutions. Great. So title, author's name, and the situation or the background of the article. Then I write the main idea of the article. By the time students graduate from university, they have spent the majority of their lives in school. However, many young people find it difficult to make the adjustment from the classroom to the workforce. Okay, I think that's all the information we need to summarize both paragraphs 1 and paragraphs 2. Now, let's summarize paragraphs 3, 4, and 5. According to Alonso, and I'll be using that kind of language, I will reference the author, Mina Alonso. These are her ideas. According to Alonso, one possible reason for this situation is the routine of school life is very different from the uncertainty that one experiences on the job. Expectations for success in school are very straightforward, and the schedule does not vary much from year to year. However, constant change is normal in the workplace, and the route to a promotion can be quite vague, even out of the person's control. Okay, so that's the first reason which Alonso describes. School life is very routine, it's very predictable. However, in the workplace, it's a lot more unpredictable, and the route to success is not as clear. So in school, it's quite clear. You study hard, you get an A+. You get good marks on an exam, you get an A+. Whereas if you want to get a promotion at work, for example, the route to success is not nearly as clear, and it might even be out of your control. Okay, next, she also points out, you will notice that each paragraph here, I'm referencing the author. So according to Alonso, she also points out that many recent graduates also have problems trying to think analytically and solve problems. They are quite skilled at memorizing information and repeating it on tests, but such abilities are not highly valued in many jobs. It would likely benefit students if more of their school experience consisted of learning to analyze and interpret information rather than simply preparing for tests. Looking at this now, I could probably remove that second sentence and make this paragraph even shorter if I wanted to have an even more condensed summary. But yeah, this is the second point. Many recent graduates have problems thinking analytically and solving problems. They're really great at memorizing lots of information and then repeating that on tests, but that's not really a skill that is necessary or valued in a lot of jobs. Okay, lastly, so this is my third transition. According to Alonso, Alonso also points out, lastly, Alonso, remember, use the family name. Lastly, Alonso notes that many students struggle when it comes to working collaboratively. I think collaboration or to collaborate, it's one of the words in your homework assignment. Remember exercises B and C? We'll look at that at the beginning of class next Wednesday. Where was I? Lastly, Alonso notes that many students struggle when it comes to working collaboratively. Whereas most assessments in school are done individually, employees are more likely to depend on their co-workers for their success. The ability to work well in a group is vital, and students do not get very much practice in school. Okay, so there's my summary of paragraphs 3 through 5. By the way, I think all three of these paragraphs, which I've written here, if I go back here, if I really wanted to compress this summary, I would probably remove the last sentence of each of these paragraphs. And if I did that, I could possibly even compress all three of those paragraphs into one single paragraph, if I really wanted a really short, really succinct summary. Anyway. All right, and here's the conclusion. Alonso then lists some suggestions from recent graduates on how to improve the way that schools teach students. So there's our topic sentence. First, internships can help students learn important job-related skills. Also, classes could become more focused on group work, which would prepare students for the collaborative nature of many jobs. Finally, more attention could also be paid to writing and presentation skills. Combining these hands-on experiences with regular class work could make the transition to the workplace much easier for many students. Quick note here, your final presentation next month will be exactly this. You and a few partners will produce a presentation, and you will be graded as a group, not individually. So hopefully you will enjoy that real world or more of a collaborative style assignment. Okay, so that is the summary of from student to employee. This is what I would like you to do for homework. Please read Writing a Summary on page 175. It's a very short blurb. It basically tells you everything I just mentioned. And then read, it's a very short article, Preparing for Your First Job Interview on page 176. And then there are two short summaries on page 177. One of these summaries is really good, and one of the other summaries is not really good. So the whole point of the two summaries on page 177, one of them is a very good example of how you should summarize an article. And the other one is a very good example of how to poorly summarize an article. So if you don't want to get a good grade, follow that one. Of course, you do want to get a good grade. This is school. There is a clear route to success in this case. All right. Also, please complete the checklist at the bottom of page 177. This will just help you distinguish very clearly which summary was done very well and which summary really needs to be rewritten. Okay. As I mentioned there, the name of the article is Preparing for Your First Job Interview. And it was actually that article that made me think that I should actually give students my own sort of take on how you should prepare for a job interview. I have a lot of experience in job interviews, and I sincerely hope that every student in all of my classes graduates from university and is able to find stable, rewarding, and high-paying employment in the future. The good jobs that are rewarding and stable and pay lots of money, they are out there, although you might find that it's hard to find jobs that have all three of those factors, personally rewarding or personally fulfilling, stable, and also lots of money. You might find some jobs that have just one or two of those criteria. It's quite difficult to find jobs that have all three. But if you do get a chance to have a job interview for a job that has all three of those criteria, that matches all three of those criteria, you better prepare very well for the job interview. And that brings me to the second part of today's class, which is going to be my advice to you on how to prepare for a job interview. Now, obviously, not all of my advice will be applicable to every student in every job interview. Some of this information might be useful to you, and some of it you might think does not apply to you. I leave that up to your discretion. Please take whatever you think is valuable from this interview and leave the rest. It's up to you. I will say, however, that the information that I will give you in this presentation is based on not only my own experiences, but also the experiences of friends and other people that I've known who have had experience in very different fields of work. So this is not just based on, for example, getting a job at a school. I've had friends that were in or have had very different experiences in many different fields. So here is the sort of collective wisdom that I've been able to draw from my life experience and also the experiences of people that I've known. Okay, so here we are, sealing the deal, getting that job. Today, I'm not going to be talking about how to get a job interview. I'm just going to be focusing on how to prepare for an interview after you've been contacted. And the main reason why I want to talk about this is because it's practical. One of the big complaints that I sometimes hear students talk about when they're discussing school is that a lot of what they learn is not practical. They cannot use it in the real world. Well, I hope some of the information I'm about to share with you will have practical value in your life after you leave school. It's important to note that you will not spend your whole life in school. You're going to be graduating either next year or the year after, and you will have to get a job and join the real world at some point in the future. I would just also like to mention that I have experience as an interviewer and an interviewee. I have done interviews and I have been interviewed myself. And I think the fact that I have experience on both sides of the desk really gives me a unique perspective on the job interviewing experience. Okay, so yeah, I'm not going to talk about the search for a job and how to prepare a resume and, doing follow-up emails and follow-up calls, that sort of thing. Could teach a whole course just on those things alone. Today, I'm just going to talk about what to do when a company has looked at your resume, they're interested in you, and they've contacted you, and you have scheduled an interview. So an interview is coming up. What are you going to do to prepare, and what should you do and not do in the interview itself? Okay, just a quick sort of disclaimer here. No two job interviews are the same. And not only are interviews different depending on which industry you're in, but interviews also change as you gain experience. There are big differences between the kind of interview that a company will give a new employee that is being hired for an entry-level position and the interview for someone with 10 years experience in the industry. The questions will be different, the approach will be different. So keep that in mind as I give this information. As you go through life and you gain more experience, you will probably have many different job interviews. No two interviews are the same. And depending on how much experience you have and depending on what industry you are interviewing for, you will find interviews vary a lot. And this is everything from what clothes you should wear to everything else. By the way, I've asked students in the past, how many job interviews have you had? And there is a great deal of diversity in Global Communication 2 classes. Some students have never had a job interview of any kind. And if you've never had a job interview, some of this will seem theoretical because you don't have any practical experience yet. Other people have had part-time jobs, either in convenience stores or factories or at private language institutes, maybe, where they have taught English, as well as many other part-time jobs they've had. Everyone comes to this presentation with different levels of job interview experience, and I hope everyone can find a little bit of value. Okay, excuse me, I'm still getting over a little bit of a cold here. I am thankful at least I don't need to wear a mask when I'm doing this. Okay, so before the interview, here's what you should do. Ask yourself, what will sell me to an interview? Look at yourself in a mirror and say, why me? You know, why should a company choose me and not somebody else? What do I do well? What are my personal qualities? What are my educational qualities? What are my professional qualifications, my work experience? What makes me a great package? Because you are a package. Make no mistake about it. When you go for a job interview, you are a product and you are trying to sell that product to a company. You are trying to sell yourself as an employee. So what I would suggest is sit down and try and write 5 sentences that summarize what makes you a marketable package, or what makes you a great potential employee. There must be 5 things that you can say about yourself that are good. You might want to classify them, have these in different categories. You might want to rank them, maybe one is more important than the other. But it's very important that you memorize them and you work them into your answers during a job interview. And you should stick to these talking points during the interview. Whatever question the interviewer asks you, you should think to yourself, which of those 5 sentences should I somehow incorporate into my answer? Also, it's a very good idea to be able to reword those sentences. You don't want to keep repeating the same sentences. You basically want 5 ideas that show that you are a great potential employee, and you should be able to say them in different words, so you're not going to just repeat yourself. Okay, so here are a few examples of different categories. You might want to say something about the value and quality of your work experience. This includes part-time work experience. Some people think, oh, I worked for 3 months as a cashier at GS25. That was useless, and I don't have anything, I didn't get anything of value for when I applied to another job. I don't think that's true. I think you should look at every kind of employment that you've had, including part-time jobs, and try and think of something of value that you learned. It could be something practical. Maybe you learned how to use a certain kind of software. Maybe you gained customer service experience, so you're very comfortable talking to strangers. Maybe you learned responsibility. For example, you were in charge of taking care of the cash register. You're responsible with money. You can be trusted with money. Whatever it is, maybe you worked at as a language teacher or a tutor. You helped someone, you tutored somebody in math. These are all examples of work that actually have some kind of real world value. And the basic skills you learned could be applied to something else. Try to find something in your part-time work or previous employment that has some kind of value. Don't just think that it was a waste of time or a part-time job that you don't need to include as part of your 5 key strengths. B, the value and quality of your academic or training credentials. You are going to graduate with a university degree from Sogang University. And that is great because Sogang University is a respected university in Korea. And we live in a society that values brand names. And Sogang University is a brand. Make no mistake about it. But it's not enough just to say, well, I graduated from this university. 25 years ago, that might have been the case, but it is not the case in 2022 and moving forward into the future. Remember, you are not the only person to graduate from Sogang University. People will be graduating this year, they'll be graduating next year. People have been graduating every year, going back for 50 or 60 years. So don't just feel satisfied knowing that you have a brand name university degree. Try and think of what skills that you learned in your experience as a student that is applicable to the job you are applying for. This can be more difficult for students that study humanities, because obviously there's a big difference between studying, for example, philosophy or English literature or one of the cultural studies, compared to computer engineering. But try and find something, whether it was learning how to prioritize tasks, learning how to focus, learning how to produce work under a deadline, whatever it is, be ready to say something about the quality of your academic training and the degree itself. Another thing to point out is that you are stable and you're reliable as a worker. When I was younger, I used to think that the world was full of stable and reliable people, and that people went to their jobs and everybody was pretty much reliable because they were adults. And let me tell you, that is not necessarily true. There are many people out there, including people that get hired for jobs, that are often late, maybe they're lazy, but they manage to get through a job interview. You want to impress upon the interviewer that you are a stable and reliable person. That is extremely important as an employee. You're also versatile. For example, you can adapt to new situations. You can learn new technology quickly. At the very least, you have a strong work ethic, meaning you can work very hard. You will work at a job and get it done. You're not only focused on the big picture, but also you can concentrate on the details and make sure that the work you do is of high quality. And last of all, here I put your interpersonal skills. And this is because a lot of jobs involve some kind of teamwork, or you're working with coworkers. And this is important because the ability to work with others is sometimes just as valuable as your technical experience. I'll give you a simple idea or a simple example from my own life. I used to know a number of musicians when I was back in Canada. And there was one young man in my hometown who was a great bass player, wonderful musician, extremely talented, but he had a hard time finding stable employment with the bands around our city. And that was because he was extremely proud and could be very, very arrogant and unpleasant to work with. As a musician, he was absolutely great. But a band is 4 or 5 or however many people working together, and you have to work as a unit. And his great musicianship skills did not make up for the fact that he was very hard to get along with. He did not have very good interpersonal skills. And after some time, When a band would look for somebody to play the bass, if they needed a bass player, they would choose somebody who couldn't play as well as he could, because it wasn't just about the technical skills, it was about the ability to work together as a group. And this is true for any job that requires you to work with a group of people and collaborate. Some people have great interpersonal skills, and those people are at a premium. This is something that you could also use as one of your 5 key strengths. By the way, please do not feel limited to these 5 examples. These are just the ones which I think are probably the most applicable to most jobs. If there is another quality which you think is more important than one of these, then by all means do that. These are just examples. Next, don't memorize long speeches. These can be very painful to listen to as an interviewer. As an interviewer, you know that somebody has memorized an answer, because an interview is kind of like a dance or a conversation where there's give and take, there's back and forth. It should not be one person talking for 5 minutes, because that sounds very unnatural, and it often sounds like the person has prepared something in advance, or they have found a speech or an answer to a question on the internet, and then they have memorized it themselves, and it sounds very insincere. No one wants to hear a long memorized answer, and trust me, no one will remember it. Interviewers sometimes have to talk to 5 or 10 people in a day. Sometimes being a job interviewer is a really hard job. You've got to talk to so many people. And trust me, if you're talking to someone for 20 or 30 minutes, if you ask a question and then that person just, spews out a long memorized answer, and they don't even look at you to see if you can ask a follow-up question or stop to ask about a detail, it sounds very artificial. So instead of having long memorized answers, just try and remember which one of your 5 talking points you want to include in that answer, and then do your best to improvise the rest. Every answer to every question should reference or be directed to one of those 5 talking points. And one of the reasons is, if you have an interviewer who talks to you for 20 or 30 minutes, they're not going to remember very much. And this is speaking from experience. If you talk to someone for 20, 25 minutes, and then the next person comes in, you talk to them for 20 or 25 minutes, and then the next person and the next person, how much do you think the interviewer actually remembers at the end of the day? They're not going to remember much. Make sure they remember those 5 key points. Those are the ones that will hopefully get you the job. Oh, by the way, I have not read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, but it is a classic in the literature of warfare. And I know that the first 2 rules of war, according to this ancient classic, are rule number 1, know thy enemy. Rule number 2, know yourself. Excuse me, I cannot remember rules 3, 4, and 5. But the important thing here is, although it's very important to know the enemy and also to know yourself, it's slightly more important to know the enemy. And there's a reason for that. If you don't know the enemy, you can't beat them, because you don't know their strengths, you don't know their weaknesses. What are their abilities? What are their defenses? You have to know yourself. But if you know yourself well, but you don't know the enemy, you won't be able to beat them in a time of war. How does this relate to job interviews? Well, I would say rule number 1, know the company. And rule number 2, know yourself. Because what you want to do in a job interview is match yourself with the company. You will need to change how you present yourself depending on what kind of person the company wants to hire. Companies have an idea of their ideal candidate, the person they want to hire, this imaginary ideal candidate. Now, if you want to present yourself as the perfect person for the job, you have to know, what does the company think the perfect person for the job is? Do they have a specific corporate culture? What kind of person are they looking for? Are they looking for a specialist in a very narrow field? Or are they looking for someone who's very curious, has a lot of general information, and is just very adaptable? Are they looking for somebody that is very interested in certain social or environmental issues? Some tech companies are quite interested in this sort of thing. Whatever these things might be, it is your responsibility as an interviewee to find out in advance. When you walk into the interview, you should be able to match your qualities with the desired, candidate, or their idea of what a desirable candidate is for the job. It's also important because one topic which might come up in the job interview is the company itself. And it's very important to show the interviewer that you know a lot about the company already. You've done your research, you've done your homework, and you can talk about different aspects of the company. You might remember the activity that we did a couple of weeks ago in class where you listened to a clip from The Devil Wears Prada, and the young woman goes into the office and the boss tells her, you don't read Runaway magazine, do you? And the young woman replies, no. So the woman wanted to work at the magazine, but she didn't read the magazine herself. And then the boss asks her, before today, you had no idea who I was, did you? Once again, the woman said, no, I didn't. So in that case, the woman is making herself a very undesirable candidate. This company produces a certain product. This woman didn't even consume that product herself. She didn't know who the boss was. She had no concrete information about the company. You don't want to be that interviewee who shows a lot of ignorance to what the company is and what they stand for. Do your research, because the more you know, the more effectively you can sell yourself as the perfect candidate for the job. Next, time to talk about interviewers. Excuse me for sniffling here, still getting over the cold. You are going to have many job interviews in your life. 5 years from now, you might be having job interviews. 10 years from now, you'll probably be looking for another job, going for another job interview. You'll probably have a very high number of job interviews throughout your life. And you're going to see some great job interviewers, some bad job interviewers, and some that are just plain incompetent. No two job interviewers are the same. There's a real spectrum, and you should be ready for the different varieties of job interviewer. There are some job interviewers that you will never see again. They're just from human resources, and they do the interviews, they make the decision, and you never see them again. Other times, the interviewer might be part of the team that you'll be working with, and those people tend to interview much more carefully because they know if they choose the wrong person, well, then they're going to have to work with somebody that's a very bad match every day. So watch out for that. Okay, so let's take a look. Yes, some interviewers are very experienced. You walk in through the door, they know who you are. They don't even need to look at your resume because they've already read it and they've memorized it. And they're very good at finding out the strengths and the weaknesses of individual candidates. And these very skilled job interviewers are very aware that some people can answer questions, like typical job interview questions, but they're not good for the job. People want jobs because they need to make money in order to survive. And they know that even if the job doesn't really suit them, it's better to have a job and make money rather than be poor and homeless and jobless on the street. But that doesn't mean that they're a good worker. A good job interviewer knows that the person sitting in the chair will say anything in order to get a job. A good job interviewer will be able to see who is actually ill-suited for the job, even though they can answer standard questions. I compare this to weeding, cutting out the weeds in a garden. Bad interviewees need to be cut out or weeded out. And a good interviewer has good weeding skills. They can sense who might be very well suited for the job, even if they don't answer one or two questions well. And they know how to ask the really hardball questions, those questions that make you really think and, oh, I didn't prepare for that question. Oh, that sort of interviewer can be almost impossible to fool because they know what they're doing. So if you want to impress that person, you really need to know your stuff. You want to get the Oscar, you want to get the job, well, then you'll have to work for it. On the other hand, you have some interviewers that really wish that they were anywhere else besides sitting down in a room talking to you. Sometimes it's not even the person who was supposed to be doing the interview. Sometimes the original job interviewer is sick or busy, or maybe the job of job interviewer is given to a different person in each round of the hiring process. Some people don't like to do job interviews, but the boss tells them they have to do it. They don't know really how to do it. They're inexperienced, and they look at your resume and maybe they have a little list, a generic list of questions, but they don't really know how to find who is the best suited for the job. And that sort of person can be hard to impress, because if the person just asks the same standard questions and they don't know how to ask really detailed follow-up questions, that's not really giving you a chance to show how much you know. And you'll have to try and work in that information because that person will not ask for it. And that can be one of the hardest things. When you are interviewed by somebody that doesn't have good job interviewing skills, this is very, very hard to do if you're not experienced. You have to find a way to give them the information that will make them think you are very qualified for the job, even if they didn't ask for it. Because some interviewers, to be honest, don't know how. So how can you identify this kind of interviewer? Well, when you go into the office, they don't have your name ready. So they're like, oh, and your name was, and then they pick up the resume and then they scan it. They might be looking at your resume during the interview because they haven't looked at the information before, or they can't remember it. They might repeat questions, and that's a very awkward situation. If the job interviewer asks you the same question twice, don't want to tell the person, I think you already asked me that question. Or if they forget your response, that sort of person can be very, very hard as an interviewer. They don't know how to dig for the information that will really show who is good for the job and who's bad. It can be really hard for you to distinguish yourself in that case. So watch out for that kind of interviewer. So what have we got? Sit down and write out a list of your 5 key points, your 5 greatest strengths, or whatever it is, your 5 core competencies. Or you might even write out 10 at first and then see maybe if you can combine some of them or eliminate some other ones. Do some brainstorming. Then try and predict the questions that the interviewer is going to ask you. Some questions you should be ready for, and it should not be a surprise. Also, always be ready to give extra information, extra details. The follow-up. I mean, if somebody says, what's your greatest strength? And you say, well, I'm a very hard worker. The next logical question is, can you tell me about a time where you really demonstrated how hard you can work? Don't say, well, I always do my best. Nobody wants to hear that. It sounds insincere. You have to tell them, 6 months ago, there was this specific situation, and this is what I did to show how hard I can work and get the job done. Be as specific as possible. Those are the moments that the job interviewer will remember. Don't talk in generalities too much. You want to give specific examples from your life to show, yes, I not only say that this is something I do well, I can give you multiple examples from my life that demonstrate clearly that I'm telling the truth. Okay. So here are some questions that you should obviously be ready for. What do you do at your current job? What did you do at your last job? Why did you leave your last job? Please do everything in your power to leave every job on a positive note. It's not always possible. But you don't want to answer the question, how did you leave your previous job with, my boss fired me? It puts you at a great disadvantage, and that could end the job interview. How would you describe yourself? Why do you want to work at this company? Why did you apply for this position? Why did you major in whatever you majored? What did you learn in your major that is applicable here? What's your greatest strength? What's your greatest weakness? Tell me about a time you collaborated with a coworker or classmate. How do you communicate effectively at work? These are all questions that, at the very least, you should be able to have something for each of these. And some of these questions are quite similar. Also, the interviewer might ask the same question, but have it worded slightly differently. Probably the hardest question to answer on this list is, what's your greatest weakness? Talking about your greatest strength, that's easy. You can talk about all the things you do well. But how do you answer the question, what's your greatest weakness? Or what's something you need to improve upon? This is a hard question because you don't actually want to give a weakness that makes you sound weak. Remember, you're trying to market yourself as a great potential employee. So don't emphasize the seriousness of a weakness because you don't want to make yourself look bad. What you want to show is that you're very self-aware. You know that you're not perfect, but crucially, you know what your shortcomings are and you're working hard to improve upon them. There's nothing wrong with not being perfect. The only bad thing would be if you don't know what your weaknesses are. If you don't know what they are, then you don't know what you should improve upon. If you can say, yes, this is my weakness and this is how I need to improve on it, that's fine. And you should have something, at least one thing that you can say that is realistic, reasonable, and surmountable. I'll give a very good example for young people. If you are young and someone asks you, what's your greatest weakness? Probably the easiest thing to say is, I have a lack of experience. You know, there might be some candidates that have more experience than me. And this is very realistic because you're young. You can't be expected to have a lot of experience. You might have just graduated from university. But as you work, you will get the experience. So it is surmountable, meaning you can overcome this weakness. Also, you can try to put a positive angle on this weakness. Yes, you do have a lack of experience, but that means you are completely willing to follow every single rule in the company's program. Actually, one of the weaknesses of some people that have a lot of experience is they think that they already know how to do the job. Yeah, I've been doing this for years. Don't tell me how to do it. If you're inexperienced and you are saying, look, I am a blank slate and I am completely willing to learn everything that this company wants me to do, and I will follow it to the letter. I don't have preconceived ideas on how to do things. I don't try to use shortcuts that I used in other jobs. I will be your model employee. That can be a better answer. Why should we hire you? You might want to try and match your character or qualifications with the company's core values and their proposed ideal type. This goes back to when I talked about doing research. Why should the company hire you? Well, because you are perfectly matched for the company's vision and the values that they support, as well as the work. How do you know what they are? You've done your research and you've found out what the company is interested in and what sort of corporate culture they have. And you angle your descriptions to show how you represent that perfect type. That is why they should hire you. Why do you want to work at this company? Oh, this is a hard question to answer because the honest answer is usually the least desirable, because I need a job and I need to make money. No, you don't want to say, I need a job, you guys are hiring, you pay well. If I work here, it will look great on my resume and then I can get a better job later on. You don't want to say that. That's too honest. But you don't want to be generic either and say, this company is well respected and a leader in the industry. Oh, nobody wants to hear that. Too generic, and it sounds like you just copied it and pasted it off of the company's website. You don't want to be too boring either. And please don't try and be funny. Some people get nervous in job interviews, and when they say something, they try to make a joke out of it, and quite often it backfires. So I would strongly discourage you from trying to use humor in some of your answers. So what can you do? Try to match the job with your long-term career goals and try and match the job with your passion and enthusiasm for certain things. Something that really impresses employers is when you have a genuine passion for whatever it is that the company is doing. And it's not just a passion for the company, it's a passion for what the company is doing. So it's like, I want to join this company because they are passionate about this industry, and I am naturally passionate about that anyway. It's a great match. Try to match the job with the company's goals. That's right, the core values it espouses, obviously. And if the company asks you, or the interviewer asks you, what kind of environment do you work in best? Do you work well in a group? Do you work well by yourself? You should obviously say, if it's a job that requires you to work in a group of people, then you should say, I like working with people. If it's a job where you'll be working alone most of the time, then you'd say, well, I prefer working alone. But don't put all of your eggs in one basket. What I mean is, don't just say that you're able, or that you love working in groups and you can't work alone. Be ready to say, yes, I prefer A over B, but I can do both, and be ready to give an example of how you've worked well in a group and how you've worked well by yourself, how you've worked well as a leader, and how you've worked well as, just a regular group member, how you've worked well when you were supervised, how you worked well when you were unsupervised. Okay. Oh, here's a hard one. Tell us about the toughest decision you've ever made. This is one of the hardball questions. Tell us about a time when you made a mistake, or there was some conflict, or tell us about the toughest decision you ever had to make. Some people, when they hear this question, they answer with something from their personal life. Like, I'm trying to think of an example. When my parents divorced, I had to choose if I wanted to live with my mother or father. Now, that's a heartbreaking story, and it might be a true story, but it's not something you should bring up in a job interview, because the truth is, you don't know that interviewer very well, and you don't know how they will respond to a personal, emotionally moving story. The best thing to do is try and keep it work related and talk about the obstacle and how you overcame that obstacle, what resources you used in order to overcome that obstacle. Even if it's something like, what's this? If you don't have any work experience and you just have school experience, maybe there was a group project that you had to do and there was almost no time left to finish it, but there was a public holiday coming up, something like Chuseok, and then you had to make a decision between spending time with your family on Chuseok or staying up late and getting the work done. You know, there's a tough decision there. Family or personal life versus, you know, a professional or academic obligation. That could be an example. Talk about what you learned from the experience, but avoid stories with personal conflicts or arguments at work. You don't want the person, the job interviewer, to think that you are a difficult person to work with. That is something that a good interviewer is looking for, and they will listen. Oh, how many times has this person had conflicts with coworkers and managers? Is this a person with a very strong attitude? Maybe they have great working skills, but maybe their interpersonal skills are not so good. A good interviewer is looking for exactly that sort of thing. Also, avoid talking about situations that did not have a resolution. If the situation was not able to be solved, and in particular, if you still now don't know how you could solve it, that's something you should probably avoid mentioning in a job interview. Okay, group interviews. This is something that you're going to experience at some point in your life. There might be a panel interview. So 4 interviewers and 1 interviewee, and each interviewer will ask the single interviewee a few different questions. Or you might have 1 interviewer and then it's you and a few other people, and they will ask you all, you know, similar questions. It's important to be respectful, to be confident, and listen carefully. This is also a chance for you to show social skills that you wouldn't have in a traditional interview. And some companies do have this kind of non-traditional interview. They might even try and get you to work together for a few minutes and like solve a riddle or puzzle. Some of the big tech companies, I think like Apple, do things like this. A good example of a non-traditional question, especially in a group situation, is to ask somebody. So I'll say, and the next question is for you. Based on what you know about the other candidates in the room, who would you hire and why? That is a hard question, because now you're being asked to choose somebody else to get hired. Now, if you have been listening carefully to what the other people said, you should have an idea about who has answered questions more effectively than others. And maybe there's something about one particular answer of one particular candidate that you thought was impressive. This would be a time when you could say, well, based on this person's answer, I think they would be the best potential candidate. This not only shows that you were listening, which is important, but it shows that you were able to evaluate what you heard as well. And those are two great skills. It shows that you were actively listening as well as judging what the person was saying and evaluating it. That is impressive. So even though you said that this other person should be hired, you've just made yourself look really good. Okay, I think it's time for a few last words. I'm just about done here. Okay, first, never turn down a chance for an interview. Even if you're not particularly interested in the job. Let's say you send out 100 resumes to 100 different companies. And you might have to send out 100 resumes to 100 different companies. Let's say a couple of companies contact you and you're not actually really that interested in the job. I would strongly recommend you go for the interview anyway, because learning to be an effective interviewee is a learned skill. You learn by experience. Nobody gives a perfect interview their first time. It's like dancing or learning any kind of skill, especially any kind of social skill. It takes experience. Now, your dream job might be waiting for you in the future. You might need to be an excellent interviewee in order to get that job. I would strongly suggest accept as many interviews as possible to make yourself the best interviewee as possible, so that when you do get the job interview for your dream job or the job that you think is your long-term career, then you will be ready for it. So here are a couple of reasons why. First of all, the more interviews you experience, the more relaxed you will be when you have a job interview, because it will be a familiar situation. It's another office. It's another hiring manager. I've done this a bunch of times. I know what the situation is. So never turn down an interview. And let's say, for example, you're not interested in the job, but during the interview, you start to realize, actually, this is better than I expected. Actually, I think I might be interested in this job. In that case, you're in the perfect position. You're in the middle of a job interview. Keep going and you might actually get it. What else? Don't ghost an interview. And by ghost, I mean don't fail to show up. The most impolite, unprofessional thing you can do is to schedule a job interview and then not show up. It's 3 o'clock. The hiring manager is waiting. The applicant doesn't show up. This can really throw off the schedule for a whole day, especially if the next person waiting for an interview has not shown up yet. It really slows things down. It makes things really inconvenient, and it's extremely unprofessional. Next, always thank an interviewer at the end, even if the interview didn't go very well. It's basic manners. And let's say you have a wonderful job interview. You answer every question perfectly. There's nothing you could have done better. Sometimes you still don't get the job. And this is one of the unfortunate truths of life. Sometimes you do your absolute best and you still don't get the result that you want. You know what? In this case, it might actually be the company's loss more than your loss. Maybe the company had a hiring manager that really didn't know how to interview well or how to assess potential candidates very well. They might have actually chosen somebody that gave very standard answers, but might turn out to be an absolute nightmare to work with. And by the way, those absolute nightmare people, they get jobs. And in your professional life in the future, I am sure you will sometimes have coworkers, and you will look at this coworker and you will think to yourself, how in the world do you pass that interview? Maybe the person is lazy, maybe they come to work late, maybe they have a very bad work ethic, maybe they have extremely poor interpersonal skills. Maybe they're just incompetent, but somehow they got hired. Sometimes companies make the wrong choice. But don't give up, because the only way that you'll succeed and find a good job is by continuing to try and never giving up. So do your research, never give up, and good luck. So the real world awaits. I hope some of this information will be of use to you. Don't forget, for today's homework, please read Writing a Summary. That's on page 175. The short article, Preparing for Your First Job Interview, that's on page 176. And exercises A, B, and C on pages 176 and 177. I hope you'll find it useful. Okay, so that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoy your weekend, and I'll see everybody next Wednesday. Okay, bye-bye.